George Strait finally admits why walking away matters more than ever. There's a moment after certain concerts that most people never think about. It doesn't happen when the crowd is screaming. It doesn't happen when the lights are flashing or when the final note hangs in the air. It happens later. After the applause fades. After the arena starts to empty. After thousands of voices turn into silence. The boots on concrete. The crew coiling cables. The stage lights going dark one by one. For most artists, that moment is just part of the routine. But for George Strait, that silence has started to mean something more. Because after more than 4 decades at the top of country music, the quiet does not just sound like the end of another show. It sounds like memory. It sounds like time. And more than anything, it sounds like a man beginning to understand what matters most now. The world knows George Strait as the king of country. The records, the sold-out shows, the #1 hits, the kind of career that almost feels impossible to repeat. But those numbers only tell part of the story. They explain success. They do not explain loyalty. They do not explain grief. And they definitely do not explain the woman who has stood beside him through every chapter of his life. Norma. Most fans know the name. But not enough people understand just how much of George Strait's story begins and ends with her. Long before the fame, long before Nashville, long before stadiums packed with people sang every word back to him, George Strait was just a young man in Texas trying to figure out what his future might look like. Music was not some guaranteed destiny back then. It was just one possible path. In fact, if you had asked him in those early years what kind of life he expected to live, he might have told you something far simpler. Ranch work. Agriculture. A steady job. A normal life. And somewhere in that quiet Texas world was Norma. They went to high school together in Pissell, Texas. At first, there was nothing dramatic about their story. No grand movie scene. No instant fireworks. They mostly noticed each other from a distance, like so many teenagers do. Then one day, George finally asked her out. Just one date. And strangely, after that, life pulled them apart for a while. They went their separate ways. Time moved on. But eventually, their paths crossed again, and this time something held. Something stuck. On December 4, 1971, George and Norma made a decision that would shape the rest of their lives. They drove across the border into Mexico and got married quietly, just the two of them. Later, they returned to Texas and had a small church wedding so their families could celebrate with them. At that moment, they were not building a celebrity life. They were just building a life. Soon after, George enlisted in the United States Army and was stationed in Hawaii. Norma went with him, and that was really the beginning of their family. In 1972, their daughter Jennifer was born. Then came the ordinary responsibilities of young adulthood. Work. Bills. Parenthood. Uncertainty. Music was still there, but it was not yet a career. After leaving the Army in 1975, George returned to Texas and enrolled in college, studying agriculture. That detail matters because it tells you how unsure everything still was. He loved music, yes. He played in local bands and small venues, but loving music and betting your whole life on it are two very different things. He joined a country band that eventually became the ace in the whole band. They played wherever they could. Tiny bars. Dance halls. Honky-tonks. The kind of places where a crowd might barely notice you unless you were really good. George was good. But good does not always mean discovered. He made trips to Nashville. He knocked on doors. He played songs for people who held the power to change his life. And they kept saying no. The industry at the time wanted a smoother, more polished sound. George Strait sounded too traditional. Too country. Too rooted in the old ways. The very things that would later make him legendary were, at first, the reasons people passed on him. After enough rejection, the dream started to feel less like a future and more like a risk he could no longer afford. So George made a decision that might have changed country music forever. He decided to quit. He had a practical opportunity waiting for him: work designing cattle pens for ranch operations. It was stable. It made sense. It was the kind of choice a husband and father makes when dreams stop paying the bills. And maybe that would have been the end of the story. But Norma was not ready to let him give it up. She had seen too much. Too many late nights. Too many miles. Too much talent. She knew something George was trying not to admit to himself. Music was not just something he did. It was who he was. So she asked him for one more year. Just one. No promises. No guarantees. Just one more year to see if something would finally break his way. And that small moment changed everything. In 1981, George Strait signed with MCA Records. It was not some huge, glamorous launch. The label was cautious. They were willing to test him with one single. That was it. One chance. One song. That song was Unwound. And when it hit country radio, something shifted. The song climbed into the top 10. Suddenly, the same sound Nashville had once brushed aside was being celebrated as fresh because it felt real. Traditional country was not dead after all. George Strait had simply shown up at the exact moment listeners were ready to hear it again. That first breakthrough led to more songs, more records, more crowds, and eventually the kind of career most artists only dream about. Hit after hit. Year after year. George Strait was no longer fighting to be heard. He was becoming the voice of country music itself. And through all of it, Norma stayed where she had always been, beside him. Not in front of the cameras. Not giving interviews. Not trying to turn herself into part of the brand. She stayed focused on the family, on the life they were protecting behind the fame. For a while, it seemed like everything had fallen into place. George's career was soaring. They had 2 children now, Jennifer and their son George Harvey Strait Jr., known as Bubba. The future looked wide open. And then, in 1986, everything changed. Their daughter Jennifer was only 13 years old when she was killed in a car accident near San Marcos, Texas. She was riding with friends. The driver lost control. The car flipped. Jennifer was thrown from the vehicle and died at the scene. There are some tragedies that divide a life into before and after. This was one of them. In a single night, the Strait family's world was shattered. The success, the music, the rising fame, none of it could protect them from that kind of pain. And from that point forward, something inside George Strait changed forever. Before Jennifer's death, he had been private, but still willing to do what the industry expected. Interviews. Promotion. Public appearances. Afterward, he pulled back in a way that never fully reversed. He stopped sharing much about his personal life. He gave fewer interviews. He built a wall around his family, not out of arrogance, but out of survival. Some pain is too personal to turn into a headline. Norma carried that loss in her own way too. A mother's grief is its own kind of silence. The questions never really stop. What if we had said no? What if the plans had been different? What if she had stayed home that night? Those questions have no answers, but they still haunt families forever. And yet somehow, in the middle of that heartbreak, George and Norma chose to create something meaningful. They helped establish the Jennifer Strait Memorial Foundation, supporting children's charities in Texas. It was not loud. It was not heavily publicized. It was simply their way of turning grief into something that might help someone else. Meanwhile, life had to keep going. Their son Bubba was still very young. He still needed stability, routine, and home. So George kept working. He kept recording. He kept performing. And oddly enough, the years that followed became some of the biggest of his career. From the outside, it looked like triumph. From the inside, it was grief walking side by side with success. That is one of the strangest truths about life. Sometimes your biggest public victories happen while your private world is still trying to breathe again. George Strait went on an unbelievable run of hit songs in the late 1980s and into the 1990s. #1 records. Award wins. Massive concert crowds. He became one of the most dominant forces country music had ever seen. But he never carried himself like a man chasing celebrity. That is what made him different. While the industry changed around him, George stayed steady. He did not reinvent himself to fit trends. He did not chase pop crossover fame. He did not become a constant media personality. He kept recording country music the way he believed it should sound. Steel guitar. Honky-tonk roots. Songs about love, loss, time, memory, and ordinary life. And people responded because they believed him. They believed the voice because the life behind it felt real. Even as the fame grew, George kept returning to Texas. To the ranch. To horses. To family. To the things that had grounded him before the world ever knew his name. And over time, Bubba grew into a big part of that life too. Rodeo, ranching, team roping, songwriting. Father and son built something strong together away from the spotlight. But even legends cannot outrun time. By the early 2010s, George Strait had spent more than 30 years touring at the highest level. That kind of life demands everything. The buses. The flights. The rehearsals. The crowds. The months away from home. Eventually a person starts asking a different question. Not can I still do this? But do I still want to live this way? In 2012, George made an announcement that caught the entire country music world off guard. He was launching what he called his final major tour, the Cowboy Rides Away Tour. The title sounded final, and fans feared the worst. But the truth was more quiet than dramatic. George Strait was not saying goodbye to music. He was saying goodbye to the road. That mattered. Because there is a difference between leaving your calling and stepping away from the pace that once defined it. He was not done being George Strait. He was simply ready to stop living out of buses and dressing rooms. And if you really understood his life, you understood why. Home had always mattered more. Norma had always mattered more. Their marriage had already survived more than most people could imagine. The uncertain years. The rise to fame. The devastating loss of their daughter. The non-stop demands of the music business. Through all of it, they stayed together. That is rare anywhere. In entertainment, it is almost unbelievable. The Cowboy Rides Away tour became less of a farewell and more of a celebration. Fans came from everywhere. Parents brought their children. Some even brought grandchildren. It was not just about the songs anymore. It was about what George Strait had meant across generations. Then came the final show on June 7, 2014, at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. More than 100,000 people packed that place to witness what many thought would be his last major concert. Country stars joined him on stage. The atmosphere felt enormous. Historic. Emotional. But if you watched George closely that night, he did not look like a man disappearing. He looked like a man closing one chapter so he could return to another. And somewhere in that crowd was Norma. Not in the spotlight. Not center stage. Just there, the way she had always been. After that, George Strait stepped back from large-scale touring. He still recorded. He still made select appearances. He still performed now and then. But the endless motion of the road was over. And in its place came something else. Stillness. Ranch mornings. Family time. Grandchildren. Time with Bubba. A slower rhythm. The kind of life that fame had interrupted for decades. For many artists, that silence after the spotlight would feel unbearable. For George Strait, it seems to have felt like peace. Because when the noise faded, the things that mattered most were still there. Norma was still there. That may be the real heart of this story. Not the records. Not the chart history. Not even the title King of Country. It is the fact that after all the success, all the heartbreak, all the years, George Strait seems to understand something many people learn too late. The crowd cannot go home with you. The awards cannot sit beside you in the quiet. Fame does not hold your hand when the hard years come. But the right person does. And for George Strait, that person has always been Norma. The world may see a legend stepping back and call it a goodbye. But maybe that word misses the point. Maybe this is not really about leaving something behind. Maybe it is about returning to what was always most important. Back to the woman who believed in him when Nashville did not. Back to the marriage that survived what fame destroys in so many other lives. Back to the family life that existed before the first hit record ever changed everything. George Strait is not walking away from music because he stopped loving it. He is stepping closer to the life he fought to protect all along. And maybe that is what makes this chapter so moving. Because after spending decades filling stadiums and making history, The most meaningful thing in his world is still something small, something quiet, something deeply human. A familiar voice nearby. A long marriage built on loyalty and memory. And the hand that was there long before the first song was ever sung. Outro. So when people say George Strait is saying goodbye, maybe they are only seeing part of the picture. This is not just the story of a country legend slowing down. It is the story of a husband choosing time, peace, and the person who stood beside him before the fame, before the heartbreak, and before history called him the king of country. And honestly, that may be the most powerful part of George Strait's story. And before we come to the end of this video, I just want to take a moment to say a very big thank you to all of you for watching. Your time truly means a lot. In a world where there are thousands of videos you could be watching right now, the fact that you chose to spend a few minutes here with me on Hajara Rama TV is something I truly appreciate. This channel continues to grow because of viewers like you. Every view, every comment, and every bit of support helps this community become stronger. And that's what makes creating these videos so rewarding. If you enjoyed this video, please take a quick moment to like the video, leave a comment below, and share it with your friends or anyone who might enjoy this content. Your interaction really helps the channel reach more people who love stories, entertainment, and updates just like you do. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my channel, Hajara Rama TV, and turn on the notification bell so you'll always be among the first to know when a new video is uploaded. There are many more exciting videos coming your way very soon, and I would love for you to be part of this journey as the channel continues to grow. I also enjoy hearing your thoughts, so feel free to drop your opinions, ideas, or suggestions in the comment section. Your voice matters here, and your feedback helps make Hajara Rama TV even better. Once again, thank you so much for watching and for being part of this amazing community. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, stay entertained, and keep watching Hajara Rama TV.